Thanks very much, David. As David said, I hadn't counted the number of years, but it has been a long time, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be invited back here. David was showing me around some of the historic sites around your campus. As an ardent basketball fan, I appreciated the fact that we went past the basketball arena, and as a faculty member at Michigan and a staunch supporter of Michigan State, I share with you our condolences about the team, and my advice is next time that guy has a shot out at the three-point line that somebody probably ought to guard him. I suspect Mr. Patino had figured that out already. Art and medicine. This is this strip up here we're going to get back to in a few minutes. That's a little bit of local color, as it were. We all like art. Who doesn't like art? Who doesn't like to go listen to a symphony or a chamber music event or a dance event or go to the art museum? And if you go to artistic events around the community, you'll probably see lots and lots and lots of people from the medical school. And you say, that's very nice, I'm really impressed, and you go home and get a good night's sleep, and you come back and refreshed and invigorated approach the reality of making rounds and taking care of sick people and doing research in the lab. What I'm going to try to suggest over the next 50 minutes or so is that maybe art can do more than that. Maybe art can help clinicians be better at taking care of patients. In other words, maybe art has instrumental value. This is something we've been testing with the medical arts program at the University of Michigan. I'll tell you a little bit about that. Others have done similar work, mostly involving the visual arts. We've branched out a little bit in a number of different ways. And then I'm going to spend much of the talk giving you some very specific examples of where I think art can help us do a better job of taking care of patients. Now, just a word here, I'm not going to be talking really about the history of medicine and art. I'm not going to be talking about what we can learn from looking at these two great paintings by Thomas Eakins, a famous Philadelphia painter of the 19th century. This, of course, is the Gross Clinic and the Agnew Clinic. We could spend the entire hour on that kind of a discussion. That's not where I think the focus is going to be for today. Now, maybe we're doing okay. Do we really need art? Is there a problem here that needs to be solved? Well, do we deliver compassionate care? I see some white coats in the audience. I suspect others of you not wearing white coats take care of patients. And if you ask doctors, do you deliver compassionate care? 78% of physicians say, yeah, I do. I deliver compassionate care to my patients. If, on the other hand, we ask our patients, it's about half. So maybe we have some room for improvement here. If we ask patients if their caregivers, are comfortable discussing sensitive emotional or psychological needs, half of them think we are. Do we consider the effect of illness on them and on their family? Half. Do we strive to understand their emotional needs? About half. So what this suggests to me is that there's room for improvement in our ability to deliver compassionate care, that you may think you deliver compassionate care, but your patients are not so sure. Maybe we can do better. Now, we're doing better not just to make us feel better, but because there's some evidence, and there's more than this, I just have one piece of evidence here, that there are physiological parameters that are improved when we deliver compassionate care. For example, diabetic and cholesterol control. Patients who had more of an empathic connection with their physicians had better numbers, and I think that there's other data that's also suggestive of this. Now, what does art have to do with it? How can this be valuable for training? One of the things that has been studied is the use of visual art to help people become a more careful visual observer. A lot of what we do is we look. And who's good at teaching us how to look? Well, it turns out that art historians are really quite skilled at how to look and how to see things. A number of years ago, I was with a colleague. I had a patient with a confusing set of GI symptoms, and he was doing a colonoscopy. And I was looking at the colonoscopy with him. And he said, now you look over here, Joel, you see here, the blood vessels are nice and sharp and crisp and clear. But if we look over here, we see that the blood vessels are kind of fuzzy and they're not as distinct. And I said to myself, what he's saying is what an art historian could be saying as she looks at a painting and says, look at the brushstrokes over here and look at the brushstrokes over here. And I said, isn't it interesting that we like to pretend that medicine is based on objective, impersonal, non-contextual science and data, and yet what we actually do sometimes feels a whole lot more like art. Notice I said objective and precise. How many students in the room? All right. I hope you're enjoying your lectures. I hope you're enjoying reading the textbooks where all the lines on the graphs all line up nice and neat, and patients usually have one problem. And there's a randomized controlled, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial with adequate powers to detect a difference, and you can look it up and impress your friends and family by being able to quote the data. But that's not the way things work in the real world. In the real world, things are ambiguous. Now, art is by its essence ambiguous. And I want to suggest that clinical practice is also ambiguous. It's essentially, I mean, for example, I don't have this music here, but Shostakovich was a great Russian composer of the 20th century, and he lived in difficult times in Russia, and Stalin, I mean, this was a time when you might very easily have been taken away to Siberia and never come back. And he wrote a symphony to put himself back in the good graces of Stalin. It's a symphony number 5. And at the end of it, there is this march. And the question is this march a great socialist victory march, you know, lauding the great Russian people? Or is it a parody? Is he writing it to say, this is what I know you want me to write? This is what I know you want it to say? And the answer, of course, is it's both. Same thing when we're taking care of patients. What's the right thing to do now? Same students in the audience, beware. Beware of the senior clinicians, the people with lots of papers on their vita, potentially gray hair, who tell you this is the right answer. Ask them why. And don't always take it, because ambiguity is at the core of what we do in medicine. Gail Geller, in an article in Academic Medicine last year, actually proposes that we ought to select medical students based on their tolerance for ambiguity. She says quality of care in ambiguous conditions might improve. The humility necessary for moral character formation might be enhanced, and the increasing ambiguity in medical practice might be better acknowledged and accepted. Now, I'll tell you that in our program, in a paper that we're in the process of writing with funding from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, we have suggestive evidence that exposure to the arts, in fact, increases medical students' tolerance for ambiguity. Stay tuned. The paper hasn't been written yet. It's going to be written whenever I have the time, maybe sometime this century, I'm not sure. Hopefully sooner than that. Finally, what else? Art's life. We're taking care of sick people. We're taking care of patients. This sounds awfully damn obvious, doesn't it? I mean, why do I have to tell you that? At this point, I would point at the hospital. Which way is the hospital where most people are training? Yeah, right over there, right now, in your hospital. What are most of the medical students and house staff doing on the wards? What are they doing at my hospital at the University of Michigan? What are they doing everywhere? You know exactly what they're doing. They're sitting in front of a computer screen, right? You laugh because you know it's true. Maybe art can help get us away from the computer screen and try to appreciate what it means to be human. Now, I know that sounds awfully damn obvious, but those of you that have spent time on the wards know that it's really easy to slip into seeing people as a set of organs, as a physiological construct, as a combination of pathological events, and not think about who they are and what their life is about. And I think that'll make us better at taking care of our patients. Now, there are a lot of ways we could do this. One of the things we could do is people like me could stand up in front of people like you and standing up in front of medical school and nursing classes and tell them so, and this is likely to be the end result. I don't think it'd be terribly effective. So I'm going to suggest that the arts are another way of doing it. We've got a wonderful program that I'll briefly tell you about. Most of this talk is going to be about specific examples of art. But David and I were talking about this today, and I know there's some interest into how you should do this. We're trying to figure out how to do it. The medical arts program, we partner with our local performing arts organization, University Musical Society, the Museum of Art, the Gifts of Art program. What we do is we offer opportunities to medical students and house officers. We bring in artists. They give presentations. We also, when we can, get the artists into the clinical setting. So, performing artists, we'll bring them on rounds. We'll take them and have them observe surgery so that when they talk to medical students about the relationship between art and medicine, they have some experience as well with medicine. We either go to the museum and look at the art, or we listen to the performance. And oftentimes they're interested because, as far as they're concerned, medicine and illness are a central part. Oh, that's a horrible typo, I apologize. Medicine and illness are a central part of human existence. So for us, medicine is what we do. For the people out there who aren't medical, here's a deep, dark secret. The young people in the audience may want to just tune out for a second. But the fact is, we're all going to get sick and we're all going to die. Every single one of us. That's something we all have in common. And so the artists, too, are interested in medicine because they, too, are human beings. And this is a couple of examples. The Takas Quartet came and gave a performance, and we had dinner with them, and there you see Andres Feyer, the cellist of the Takas Quartet in the bottom. Top, you see Wayne McGregor, the head of Random Dance, the modern art troupe in England, talking about the physicality of medicine, something we never think about. He said he went to see his doctor, and he pointed out that we are dancing when we see our patients. As you palpate, as you walk around, as you walk into the room, you are a physical object. You are a person, and your patients are paying attention to you as you walk into the room. It's something we don't think about. At least I didn't tend to think about it. I'm going to share some quotes with you. These are all from medical students and house officers who attended the event. Discussing the physical exam as a kind of dance provided me with a new way to see our interaction with patients. He talked at length about how we need to train ourselves to read the body as much as we are trained to listen to the story of the patient. I really think that, particularly after seeing the performance, that reading the body language is a critical skill we need to learn. Now, that may seem obvious, it probably is, but who better to teach you that than somebody who is a modern dance choreographer whose job it is to read bodies and to train bodies and to think about bodies and physicality. I thought that was brilliant. Another arts event we enjoyed was an opera called Einstein on the Beach. It's a Glass-Wilson collaboration, originally put out in 1976. It's kind of a tough sell as an opera. It's 5 hours long. There is no intermission. There are no characters. There is no plot. And the music is incredibly repetitious. So when you go, you either love it or you hate it. Anybody here heard of Einstein on the Beach? Or, yeah. Did you ever see it?
Never seen a lot.
Yeah, well, it's not done a lot. It was, they recently, a troupe went around the world and actually started in Ann Arbor and worked it out in Ann Arbor. And so we took medical students there. And what did they say? They had some incredible observations. A lot of what we do is very repetitive. It's easy to lose focus and attention. We take the time and energy to be aware of what we're doing. Medical practice becomes more refined, cost-effective, safe, and patient-centered. The performance required the artist to be ever present in their repetitive tasks, and the end result is a testament to the power of such focused concentration. So what happens at Einstein is, for example, when you've got 5 hours to work with, you can do a lot. So the actress is walking diagonally across the stage, and you kind of get mesmerized, and then you suddenly start to notice that she's only walking to the center of the stage and back. So she's changed. What does this mean? Is this important? Are you supposed to pay attention? Now you're in the emergency department, and you've got a patient in there who had some trauma, and his blood pressure is 120, and his blood pressure is 120, and his blood pressure is 120, and his blood pressure is 110, and his blood pressure is 105. What does this mean? Little dehydrated, or is there something big going on we need to pay attention to? Also on Einstein, subtle details in a patient that lead to greater changes in their medical condition, recognizing patterns and then recognizing changes or adjustments in those patterns. So that's one example of something we did and some of the lessons we learned from it. We also go to the art museum when we see special exhibits. Sometimes we deal with different cultures. There was a wonderful exhibit of contemporary Chinese woodblocks. But one of the things we do is go to the Contemporary Art Museum and ask learners to stand in front of a work of art that they either don't understand or don't like, or both. And we pick whatever work of art more people are standing in front of, and that's the one we spend our time with. We do this, by the way, with curators. I should have emphasized that. This isn't just free-flowing, what have you. The Einstein on the Beach session we had a dinner afterwards with a member of the ensemble who talked to us about it. So this is with curators. And I was really struck here, and this is, I apologize, I should get a better slide. This is a work with the classic modern art title of Untitled. And what it is it's a cord, an extension cord, and there's a nail hanging on the wall, and it loops over the nail, and there are two light bulb extensions, and there's two light bulbs. And you look at that and say, hell, I could go to Lowe's and do that, and you probably could. But then you start to think about what the author is saying, what the artist is saying. And what this is about, it's about a couple, two men who are HIV positive, who have AIDS. And you think about the fact that in the art museum, everything there is permanent, or is supposed to be permanent. Those light bulbs are transient. They will burn out. And not only that, they won't burn out at the same time. And you start to think about what he's saying with this exhibit. And suddenly what you thought you didn't understand and wasn't really art starts to become incredibly meaningful. That in this world of presumed permanence, we are not permanent, and we depart from this world, and we depart at times not always of our own choosing. We see patients we don't like. I see patients I don't like. I see patients I don't understand. Maybe thinking about art like that can help us think about our patients. We also have been privileged to have literary artists come and visit us. Here is Ray Armentrout, a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, herself a sufferer from adrenal cancer. She has talked publicly about this. I'm not breaching any confidences here. Who talked about having adrenal cancer and then met with the medical students and house officers, some of whom brought some of their own poems and talked about literature and medicine. We want to understand in the world of medicine, what does it mean to have cancer? What does it mean to be unsure about what's going to happen? We can talk about that, and some of us can talk about it very well. I would argue that a great poet can talk about it and bring an element to the table that is, if not unique, is certainly very, very important and very special. So now I'd like to go and consider three arenas in which art can help us, and look at works of art around those arenas. We're going to talk about pain, we're going to talk about ambiguity, we're going to talk about the life cycle. And I'm going to give you some works of art. Every one of these works of art we could spend hours on, and I'm just going to whet your appetite. I encourage you to come back to them on your own time. I don't claim that these are the best examples. I don't claim they're the only examples. You probably all have examples, and maybe in the discussion section you can share some of your examples. I will just say that these are examples that speak to me, that make me think about some of these issues. Pain. Emily Dickinson, a reclusive 19th century American poet, wrote a lot of short poems, very short, usually without titles. The title is usually taken to be the first line of the poem. Pain has an element of blank. It cannot recollect when it begun, or if there were a time when it was not. It has no future but itself. Its infinite contain its past, enlightened to perceive new periods of pain. So what's she trying to tell us here? Well, she's trying to tell us a lot. But I think she's trying to help us understand what it means to be in pain. That you, when you're in horrible, excruciating pain, first of all, there are no words to describe it. Pain has an element of blank. Now think about that. Pain has an element of blank. And you can't, it's like it's going to go on forever. You don't remember when it started. You don't know when it's going to end. It's just there. Now, again, we could spend a long time talking about this poem, and I hope you can go, this is easily findable. You can also wonder, is she talking about physical pain or emotional pain? Could be both. I don't know. I think this is one way that we can start to think about what it means to be in pain. Another way, another kind of pain, another American author, is this young man. His name is Ernest Hemingway. And when he was young, he used to spend his life up in northern Michigan, the northern lower peninsula, for those of you that know the peninsulas of Michigan. And he was on the shores of Lake Walloon. Lake Walloon is said to be one of the most beautiful lakes in the world. National Geographic said it was one of the 10 most beautiful lakes in the world. I don't know if that's true. I've not visited all the lakes in the world, but it is very beautiful. And Hemingway's dad was a doctor, and he wrote a set of stories called the Nick Adams stories about his time spent with his dad. I'm going to talk about one of them here. It's called Indian Camp. Anybody read Indian Camp in the room? Okay. Easy to find on the net. No, I mean, Hemingway's easy to find. The story's called Indian Camp. It's about going to an Indian camp with his father, who's a physician, to see a woman who's having a hard time laboring, and she can't deliver the baby. And the father's going to go out and perform a cesarean section. This is in an era when cesarean sections were quite new and bold. So they go and they hop in the canoe and they get over to the camp. And this story, by the way, can sustain, I have taught this story for 3-hour seminars. We could talk about it for a long, it's only 4 pages. But because it's Hemingway, every single word counts. And they get there and they see the woman, but in the upper bunk was her husband. He had cut his foot very badly with an axe 3 days before. He was smoking a pipe. The room smelled very bad. So they come in the hut. The husband's in the upper bunk. Just then the woman cried out, "Oh, Daddy, can't you give her something to make her stop screaming?" asked Nick. "No, I haven't any anesthetic," his father said. "But her screams are not important. I don't hear them because they're not important." This, to me, is the crux of the whole story. And it's Hemingway, so every word counts. His father says, "Her screams are not important. I don't hear them because they're not important." Well, they go on, they do the cesarean section, the baby is delivered, nice and happy and healthy. Hemingway's characters they're very proud. They talk about it's like being in a football locker room after a big win, and Father says, ain't that something? I did a cesarean section with a fishing knife and sewed her up with fishing twine. But then he says, yeah, ought to have a look at the proud father. They're usually the worst sufferers in these little affairs, the doctor said. I must say he took it all pretty quietly. He pulled back the blanket from the Indian's head. His hand came away wet. He mounted on the edge of the lower bunk with the lamp in one hand and looked in. The Indian lay with his face towards the wall. His throat had been cut from ear to ear. Why did the father kill himself? Because of screams. He heard the screams. The doctor said, I don't hear her screams because they're not important. The father could only hear the screams. That was his wife. And so he killed himself. There are other potential things we could talk about. There's a lot of race involved here, a lot of racism. Nobody talks to him, but he sees white men come in his room and start attacking his wife with knives. He doesn't know what they're doing. I was visiting in China, and this story is taught in Peking University, where they talk about shame as being another potential reason. He was ashamed. But at the heart, I think he didn't hear the screams because they're not important. Now, in medicine, what do? Do we ever do things that cause pain? Do we ever do things that cause patients to scream? Do we ever not hear their screams because they're not important? We need to do that LP. We need to get that line in. We need to get that airway. And we need to think. I think what this story does is it gives us a way to circle back and think about when we do that. I'm not saying we should never do that. I've done that myself. You know, okay, this is what we're going to do, and if the person screams, fine, they can scream, but it doesn't matter. You know, we got a bunch of people here, we got some duct tape, we're going to get the things in the right position, and we're going to do it. We need an airway, we need it now. Okay, I'm not going to use any anesthetic, we need it now. So pain. So literature can help us think about pain, think about excruciating pain, think about the pain that we inflict on our patients. Ambiguity. And for this, I'm going to turn to some visual art. This, by the way, is the garden court in the Detroit Institute of Arts. It's a mural by the great Mexican muralist Diego Rivera, one of the three great Mexican muralists of the 20th century. This, perhaps, is his most magnificent work. Like any work of art, my showing it to you on a slide is but a smidgen of what it's like to experience it. This is what the room is like. The room is frescoes all around the room. Has anybody in here been to this? Yeah? Is it spectacular? Yes. Yeah, you really could. So this is what I'm going to focus on. And those of you, if you're ever anywhere near it, it's worth the trip because this doesn't travel. It's part of the building. But I'm going to focus here on this wall. What Diego Rivera was asked to do was create a pan to American industrialism. This was in the days when the American auto industry was going great guns and Detroit was its center. There's a ton of stuff going on here, as you said. We could spend hours, weeks. Well, just like Alfred Hitchcock, he puts himself in everything that he did. The man with the bowler cap over here is in fact Diego Rivera, shown looking in. But I want to focus on this top strip, which is the one that I've been using as kind of a place to come back and rest our eyes. Because it shows some of the ambiguity of science. And we're going to focus on this panel over here and the panel on the opposite side and on the panels underneath it. And I am truly sorry that we don't have time to talk about everything else that's going on. And along with that, bear in mind this is one of 4 walls, each one of which has a lot going on. So let's look at this. And this is, if you will, science and its glories. What we see here is we see some scientists working to make vaccines. We see a cow, a pig, and a horse from which vaccines are made. Presumably this is a diphtheria vaccination. Park Davis had its farms very near the DIA in those days. Diphtheria vaccination was a truly life-saving medical innovation. I mean, we get all excited about a lot of science and medicine. Most of it doesn't really do much. Diphtheria vaccination saved lives, saved many, many, many lives. And so this is, you know, and the child here, the child, interestingly enough, is modeled after Lindbergh's child. Lindbergh was the first person to fly across the Atlantic. While this fresco was being made, his child was kidnapped and later found dead. That's the model. Resembles Lindbergh's child. There's almost a glow around the top of it, almost an angelic pose. There were people who were upset about that, wanted it taken off the wall. Fortunately, it was not. A brief aside about art and politics. From here, from there, Diego Rivera went to New York City to the Rockefeller Center, where he was asked to do a similar set of frescoes for Mr. Rockefeller. And those of you who have been to the Rockefeller Center and spent some time there know that you didn't see his frescoes. And the reason is he was creating an image, and Mr. Rockefeller came in when he was in the process of doing these frescoes and said, oh, what's going on here? He was supposed to do something on the history of the world. And Rockefeller said, well, who's that over there? And they said, well, that's Marx. And who's that over there? And that's Lenin. And why are these people so prominent? Well, because the Soviet Union is a big part of world history in this period. And Rockefeller said, could you make them a little less prominent and, you know, kind of foreshadow the US and a little less Russia? And Diego Rivera said, I'm a great artist and you asked me to create great art, and that's what I'm doing. In other words, no. And he came to work a little while later and knocked on, you know, the door was locked, and the guard said, I'm sorry, you can't come in. And Diego Rivera said, what do you mean I can't come in? He said, I'm doing this art. And the guard said, no, you're done. Mr. Rockefeller agreed to pay you, I don't remember the exact amount, whatever it was, here's your check. And to make a long story short, they were jackhammered off the wall. They no longer exist. This, fortunately, was not. So this is science in a good way. And beneath we see healthy cells and a healthy placenta. But what Diego Rivera wants to do is to complexify the situation, to show you that science isn't always good. Sometimes science is bad. Sometimes science is evil. Sometimes science hurts people. And here you see scientists creating mustard gas, poison gas, which was going to be used in the First World War. The First World War, probably the most horrible war ever fought. It brought us innovations like machine guns and barbed wire and poison gas. And here we see sick cells dying. So by putting these at opposite ends, Diego Rivera is saying, you know, science can be good, science can be bad. It's ambiguous. He was not aware, nobody was aware, that within a few years mustard gas would become the first of the cancer chemotherapeutic agents that was used. Some experiments done at Yale University in the Second World War. So, you know, it's the ambiguity of good science, science for good, science for evil. And these are the healthy and sick cells. So this is an example of how really getting into a work of art can help drive home this notion of ambiguity. Just for the hell of it, I'll show you. This is we went to the DIA, and this is our medical arts program. All gathered outside the DIA. You can see by the fact that they're smiling, they're all very happy. I'm in here somewhere. There I am. This is Sanjay Singh, who is my collaborator in the project. We've been evaluating the program for a couple of years we've got a control group of people who don't participate in this. We've been using a mixed method analysis, quantitative and qualitative. And these are our experimental subjects. Switch gears. Another example of ambiguity. This is a scene from the Ring of the Nibelung, Wagner's cycle of 4 operas, 17 and a half hours of music, not counting intermissions. I have no intention of summarizing the entire plot for you. But I want to talk about what's going on here. This is Fricka, the queen of the gods, and this is Wotan, the king of the gods, and he rules the world. But he has to follow the rules. And what has happened in the previous act is the gold has been stolen. This is magic gold whoever owns it controls the world. And the gold has been stolen and Wotan wants to get it back, but he can't get it back because he actually made a deal to give it to the people who they gave it to. So what has happened in Act 1 is Sigmund and Sieglinde have run away and they're being chased by Hunding. Sigmund and Sieglinde have fallen in love in Act 1. There are a couple of problems here. For one thing, Sieglinde happens to be married to Hunding at the time. This makes this adultery. For another thing, both Sigmund and Sieglinde, they happen to be brother and sister, which is a little problematic. They don't realize they're brother and sister until they fall madly in love with each other at the end of the act. And their father is Wotan, who has had consort with non-godlike creatures, hence creating Sigmund and Sieglinde. So what they're arguing about here is what to do next. And Wotan wants to let him go, and Fricka says you got to stop him. And Wotan says, Fricka, you don't get it. If you don't let them go, Valhalla, our brand new house in the sky, which we built at the end of the first opera, this is the second opera, Valhalla is going to go up in flames. We're going to lose everything. And she says, dude, you don't get it. This is adultery. This is incest. This is fundamentally morally wrong. I am sick and tired of you running around down on earth, and this has to stop, and it stops now, and you're going to behave right. And he says, but Valhalla is going to go up in flames if you don't cut me some slack here. And she says, I don't care. You know, I'm really tired of the way you've been treating me all these years, and it's incredibly complicated, and I would love to spend the time to explain it to you. To make a long story short, she wins the argument, kind of, and at the end of Götterdämmerung in the last opera, Valhalla, in fact, does go up in flames and burns to the ground. So what does this have to do with medicine? Now you're taking care of a patient in the hospital. It's a true story. Patient comes from another country, and you realize, and she's got cancer, and you want to treat her cancer, and you realize that it's not really the person you think it is, but it's her cousin. She's there under a false ID. She's using somebody else's name. She's on somebody else's chart. What do? If you blow the whistle, obviously it's bad to be taking care of patients who are there with false names. On the other hand, if you blow the whistle on her and send her back to her country of origin, she's probably going to die. So what do? You don't want to, it's not good to send people out to die. It's also not good to take care of people who are there under somebody else's name. Just like in De Valkyrie, ends versus means. We can see this in politics. When is it okay to support a country who has values you really don't like because from a strategic and political standpoint, they play a key role? Or when do you say, I'm sorry, but the morals trump the key role and we're not going to support you? And I'm, in the interest of being far from home, I'm not going to get more specific than that, but you can all mull over this kind of ends versus means. When does it justify what's going on? One more example from literature before we switch modalities. Tom Stoppard, American playwright, wrote a play called Rock and Roll. And when I saw this scene, it just absolutely grabbed me because I thought it was so powerful and effective for teaching us about medicine. In this scene, a lot goes on. In this scene, Eleanor is an academic. She's got breast cancer, and she's dying of breast cancer, and she's going to be dead soon after this scene. But weeping, she says, they've cut, cauterized, and zapped away my breasts, my ovaries, my womb, half my bowel, and a nutmeg out of my brain, and I am undiminished. I'm exactly who I've always been. I am not my body. My body is nothing without me. That's the truth of it. Before I go on, I just want to say, I don't know about you, but I've read this and seen it, and just reading it out loud here, that gives me chill bumps. You know, how many of our patients do we have upstairs in the hospital who are just like Eleanor? And we don't always realize that they're still them, even though their body, as she says, look at it. As she stands at the front, she rips open her dress, she says, look at it, what's left of it. It does classics. It does half-assed feminism. It does love, desire, jealousy, and fear. Christ is it do fear. So who's the me who's still in one piece? Again, the philosophers in the audience can talk about this in very effective and academic ways. I think that somehow this drama gets home this issue of personhood and illness and disfigurement and death in ways that bespeak the fact that the arts have a power. They have a power that some other modalities simply don't have. I'm going to turn now to the last of the art form, and we're going to turn to the life cycle and death. I'm going to talk about music. I love music. Music is different than some of the other arts in some important ways. For one of the things it does is it's got a rhythm, and it's got a time. What do we do all day long? We run around. We run, look at me. I ran down from Michigan. I'm running up there. The first thing I'm going to do when I'm done with this is I'm going to check my email. You know, I've got a whole bunch of things I got to get done by tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera. Music makes you slow down. Music makes you take things at the pace that the artist is presenting them. Music draws you in. I'm going to play for you a work of music by a guy named Richard Strauss, 20th century German composer. Magnificent composer. Strauss, when he was young, wrote a tone poem called Ein Heldenleben. Ein Heldenleben is a hero's life. And it's bold and it's brash, and the hero rides forth and conquers, and you know, it's a wonderful story of the kind that we all like to tell when we're young and foolish. And then life intervenes. Strauss is in Germany during the Second World War. He lives through the hell of what it was like to live in Germany during the Second World War. He goes into exile in Switzerland, and there he writes his 4 last songs. And I'm going to play for you one of those songs. I'm going to say a couple of things about it. One of this, that if you think I'm exaggerating about the Heldenleben, he quotes Ein Heldenleben at the end, just as the singer is singing the line, "Is this perchance death?" The last line is this perchance death? So, you know, I don't know what it's like to die. I've never done it. I will. And Strauss didn't know either. But I think that to take a gene, and the other thing is he was 84 when he wrote this. There is an ageist tendency in American society, right? Think about that as you listen to this. The guy was 84 when he wrote this. He's in his 9th decade of life. Others have noted the profundity. The American writer Philip Roth, writing about the song we're about to hear, the profundity that is achieved not by complexity, but by clarity and simplicity, for the purity of the sentiment about death and parting and loss, for the long melodic lines spinning out in the female voice soaring and soaring, for the repose and composure and gracefulness and intense beauty, for the ways one is drawn into the tremendous arc of heartbreak. The composer drops all masks and at the age of 84 stands before you naked, and you dissolve. This is a song that's recorded by Elizabeth Schwarzkopf with the Cleveland Orchestra and George Sell. It lasts about 8 minutes. I'll show you as we go along the music. I'll show you, you'll hear the music. She's singing in German. I've got the simultaneous translation next to it. And I think I'll let Strauss speak from here on out. So what I've tried to do over the past 50 minutes or so is, it's good, we don't have to hear it again. All right. Is to introduce you to some ideas about how art might be useful for teaching medicine, for taking care of patients, for thinking about things like pain and ambiguity and even death. CAT scans are great, DNA tests are wonderful, I do them all the time. I do think that if we turn to art, we can gain something of value in helping us to think about how to take care of our patients in ways that they deserve, and in the same time, I think may help us as well. So I thank you all for your attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
There's time for questions from the audience. So if you could tell me more about the faculty that you call on in terms of who within the School of Medicine, but then also the people that you work with in various venues. Part of this is always going to be the resources that you have available.
Well, the faculty within the School of Medicine are myself, Sanjay Saint, Jim Stanley, are the co-directors. We spend a lot of time reaching out to faculty. Well, first of all, the performers who come through. You know, the Takash Quartet, Einstein, Wayne McGregor, we've had many others, the Merce Cunningham dance troupe. We've had other dramatic artists and musicians who come and talk to us. And it's also the resources from the university, from the School of Music, from the Department of Art, as well as the Museum of Art. I mean, one of the keys here is this isn't, we want to make sure that we're doing this at a serious intellectual level, that we don't, that when somebody wants to talk about, for example, to the students about a work of art or about a work of music, that they actually know what they're talking about. So we're not really as interested in having somebody say, you know, this is how it makes me feel, but we're more interested in having somebody say, if you look at it this way and you think about it this way, like, for example, Steve Whiting is with the Associate Dean up in the Music School, has done some wonderful discussions of the works of music that we've heard. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a former ICU nurse, now working on a Ph.D. in Humanities. Medical humanities is my passion and my area of research. And I'm more interested in using arts and literature as a means of self-care for the caregivers, because I think that's something that might be a little lacking in medical education. But I'm having trouble bridging the divide between the qualitative research that we do in the humanities and the quantitative research that is sort of demanded by the scientific community. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions about that.
I agree with the problems that you presented. Self-care. I mean, one of the things that the turn to the objective scientific medicine of the early 20th century did was it tended to take us, the caregivers, out of the equation and not pay any attention to how we feel. And of course, just like our patients are human beings, their caregivers are human beings too. And so one of the things that art can do, and I quoted Wayne McGregor about being aware of our physical presence, it can make us think about how we feel and how it makes us feel to inflict pain and how it makes us feel to take care of people who are dying. That's very hard. And one of the things you can do is ignore it. One of the things you can do is say, well, I'm not going to let, I'm here, I'm going to do everything right. But I think that arts is our way of getting into that for ourselves. So I think that I see that as a part of what this art and medicine is doing. Now, the research. If it were up to me, and it's not, I would have banned the term qualitative research a long time ago. I really don't like that. And I don't like it for two reasons, at least. One is that it's dishonest. All qualitative research is to some extent quantitative. All quantitative research is to some extent qualitative. Let me give you a couple of examples. What could be more qualitative than somebody, writing about Beethoven's, structure in his piano sonatas? And if you say it's rare to see this kind of a structure, Well, you've made a quantitative statement there. It's rare. It's common. All qualitative research, the brushstrokes here are more clearly defined than the brushstrokes there. That's to some extent a quantitative statement, but you say that's qualitative research. Similarly, the hardcore quantitative, first of all, what do the words mean? There's a lot of work on inequities in healthcare, and we want to talk about race in healthcare. Well, what does race mean? It turns out it's really very complicated. It's not as simple as you might think. Furthermore, simply your choice of what you want to study is some kind of a value judgment. I think this is more important than that, so I'm going to study that. So they're really quite mixed together. That's the first reason I don't like the artificial divide. The second is it carries with it an implicit hierarchy, which I think was embedded in your question, which is the notion that qualitative research is nice for kind of playing around, but if you really want to lock things in, you need to do quantitative research. Oh, I'm sorry, there are important questions that are not susceptible to analysis by quantitative research. And to try to force them into that model is to rip the guts out of exactly what it is you're trying to study. So if you want to study how to do a better job taking care of patients in the ICU and what it means to an ICU nurse when their patients die, or when they feel like they can't take the best care they can of their patients, or when they feel like they are taking the best care they can of their patients, or whatever questions, and you would know better than I what the questions are. But if you say, okay, fine, we're only going to study that if we can get a 5-point Likert scale and run it through your favorite statistical program, I think you're ripping out that which is most important about the question you're trying to study. Now, the third part of your many-part question, most of which I've forgotten, had to do with how do we solve this problem, and I'm working on it. We're all working on it. I don't have a quick and easy answer for you. Yes?
I work for the Kentucky Center for the Performing Arts, run a program called Arts and Healing, so we're
Okay.
in the community.
So I guess the most this reached a sympathetic set of ears.
Absolutely. And I think what is more of a comment in your reference to looking at this side of the painting and seeing the well-defined things, and over here seeing the blurry. One of the things that I find with we're working with patients mostly, but some caregivers, but is that when we sit down to do a painting with them, they're not painters, but they're going to approach this, and one of the things that they learn in the process is how to see. It is how to look. Oh, I can't paint, but if I have a picture of a bird in front of me, by the end of my hour, I've learned how the bird's tail goes, and I've learned how the feet look, by actually doing it. So just a different level of what you were saying. There's the visual learning of it, but then there's also really seeing that we don't look.
Right.
We don't know what the bird's feet look like because we've never
Paid any attention to it. I was told I was supposed to repeat the question. I've been not doing that. So this is a three-part comment, and let me comment on your comments. First of all, you mentioned the use of arts for patients. That's incredibly important. It's incredibly powerful. It doesn't happen to be what we're studying, but it's not because I don't think it works or that we should do it. The Gifts of Art program, which was one of our collaborators, does a lot of that where we come from. The second is the creating art. I didn't mention that, I don't think, but we also do that. We have sessions in which we go and our learners create art with somebody helping to guide them. And that's an important part of what we do. The third point was the most important, and I've forgotten. Oh, singing. Thank you. Yeah, I talked about music and slowing down for music. It's the same thing with art, with visual art, with sculpture, with paintings. How many of us have been to an art museum, and particularly when it's a massive museum like the Uffizi in Florence, and after a while, you're just, you're just strolling through the room saying, oh, that's very nice over there. Yeah, that's kind of cute over there. And these are works of art of unbelievable magnitude. You've just completely OD'd, and you can no longer take it in, which is too bad. What we do, and the slide that went off there, one of the things we do is we sit down in front of a work of art, and others have done this as well. This is probably the most common form of art and medicine that's practiced in this country for learners, is to say, okay, we're going to spend a half an hour in front of this painting. And you start to see things, as you said, about the feet of the bird. If you spend a half an hour in front of this painting, and if you have somebody who knows what they're doing helping to guide you through, you start to see more, you start to ask questions, you start to no longer view the world in a passive way, like I'm going to let the world impinge on me, but you start to interact and you say, well, why did the artist do it this way? Why did she choose to present this and not that? When she did present this, why did she choose to show it from this angle or that angle? And now, instead of simply a passive, isn't that nice, now we're actively engaging. And that's what I hope we do with our patients, frankly, is not just see them, but engage with them. Comments, questions? Yes, ma'am.
I understand that you're talking about your program is involving doctors and medical students,
Correct.
practitioners. Do you think that will then spill over to the patient's care? Because I'm thinking of when you're hospitalized, the only thing that you've got to entertain you is the TV they come in the room. They don't have any opera singers coming in. They don't have any great books or great works of art or literary things, and I'm not sure how you would implement it, but I feel like that would be more key in many ways, particularly people who are hospitalized for a long period of time. And I've sat with two people who in a hospice unit when they were dying, and there was no music, nothing. I told my family, if you don't put headphones on me when I'm in that shape, I will come back and haunt you forever. But do you think that that will tend to make the doctors more conscious of maybe the patients need some of this art?
Yes. Question had to do with how this will spill over into impacting on the patients, and I think it will. I will simply say that when my great aunt was dying, we played Strauss for her because she liked Strauss, and I don't know if she heard it or not, but I think she probably did. The Gifts of Art program does a couple of things that are apropos of what you're saying. One sounds trivial, but if you've ever been in a hospital, you know it's not, which is we come around with works of art to hang on the wall, and patients get to choose what they want to look at all day long. Because so when you're lying in the hospital bed, do you want a bird or do you want an abstract red and green? It's your choice. Here are a whole bunch of prints. You decide. They also have musicians that come around, and you can. I have to say, it is a little macabre in the ICU to hear somebody playing a harp, but nonetheless, families say we'd like to have some music, and they tell us what the patients, us, not me, I don't run. Elaine Sims, by the way, that's a name you might want to look. She's written and done some very, very innovative things. The families and patients tell us what kind of music they'd like, and so we have people who play guitar. A whole bunch of different instruments, and they come to the patient's room and play for them. And I agree, lying in a hospital bed it can be mind-numbing. I mean, the only good news is the thrust of medicine now is more and more. People tend to get moved out of hospitals sooner, so that many people who are left in hospitals are not in as good shape and not as engaged with the outside world as they once were, when we used to have people who would stay for 3 and 4 and 5 weeks. But that's a good point. Yeah.
Dr. Howell, thank you for talking. I actually conferred with you via email.
Yes, indeed.
Just to say that in our community, I've worked with Kristen at the Kentucky Center for the Arts. I'm a nurse in graduate school, and Kathy at Fraser, we have an arts and healing program. We have paintings on the wall. Environment is very important for patients, and we as practitioners have a lot of power within us to make those changes within nursing and medicine to come together. We have our art museum. It's going to be opening again in another year, which I've worked for many years, and to implement those programs here in our community. I think we have some great opportunities to do that. So your talk is very
Great.
inspiring.
But the comment had to do with the local opportunities, which are burgeoning, which is great. I should say, by the way, I've been talking about medical students. I did not mean for a moment to imply the nurses are not equally important to taking care of patients. It's just that I work in a medical school, and we work with medical students and not nursing students. You could very easily take everything I said about medical students and doctors and talk about nursing students and nurses, and it would apply without exception across the board. Yeah.
You didn't mention very much about writing, about the literary arts, and I worked with an oncology team in Winston-Salem with the healthcare givers, the doctors and the nurses who asked me to, and they found a great deal of relief in writing about their experiences and were able to share it with each other. So I don't know if you use that in the role.
The comment had to do with the value of writing, and particularly on an oncology unit. Absolutely. It's just not something we've done. I think it's a great idea. It's more, I mean, the narrative medicine and journaling is a rapidly growing field. The closest we've come is with when Ray Armentrout came, we had students bring in poems that they had written, and they read them to each other over dinner. One of the other fun things we did, you asked about expertise, is we engaged the Masters in Fine Arts program. And it's incredible. I mean, students who don't talk to each other very much, they loved it. You know, getting people from the medical school and people who are there studying how to write and sitting them down for dinner together. Yeah, they really enjoyed it a great deal. And we've continued to involve the MFA program. We do literary works probably 2 or 3 times a year. This year we had a session with, I'm blanking on the guy's name. It was from, the Granta is a British literary magazine. They had some writings, and we had the author from that come, Chris Adrian, come and talk to us. And we're going to be talking about Abraham Verghese's In My Own Country in a few weeks. But that's not actually writing, that's reading. So it's different.
Any other questions? And with that, we say thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.